Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Good morning and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Jayne Allen about The Most Wonderful Time. Welcome, Jayne.
Thank you, Dan. I'm glad to be here with you.
I'm glad you're here as well. Jayne is a writer, a producer, an entrepreneur, and a forever recovering attorney, which is probably something we need to explore at some point during this conversation.
Right.
Jayne also is a graduate of both Duke University and Harvard University. Could you have not chosen like a community college so the rest of us could aspire to it?
Right. Two little schools on the East Coast. Come on.
That's right. Two little shabby schools. We should feel sorry for you. Two wonderful places, really. So give the audience an overview about The Most Wonderful Time.
Well, I am so excited. I love this book, first of all. I need to say that. And also there's some light coming in. Hopefully that's not too distracting. I've been trying to close the blinds, but maybe that's so I am a huge fan of holiday rom-coms, and so this sort of premise and this idea of having a swap where you walk in the shoes and live in the home of someone else very different from you was very, very appealing as a premise to dive into fiction. We have a movie, obviously The Holiday, that kind of takes that premise in a very kind of surface cursory way. And I wanted to take that premise and that idea, that concept, and really dive into it in the way that you would do in fiction and literature, the way that you can really explore character and really do some exploration that you can really kind of only do in books. And so I took two very different women who are both desperate for different reasons. You have Ramona Tucker, who is from the South Side of Chicago, a Black woman, and you've got Chelsea Flint, who is a white woman who grew up in Malibu, is relatively privileged, who's an artist, but who was ensconced in grief, who's sort of trapped there, trapped in paradise, strangely, but they are desperately in need of change, and change is coming for them in the pages of this book. So it is there's romance and there's also self-discovery, and I don't want to spoil too much, but there's just an adventure that unfolds. You really get to experience the city of Chicago over the holidays. You really get to experience the city of Malibu, and for their individual respective characters. The locations are characters. I went to Chicago to like encapsulate the energy of the city over the holidays. I live in LA, so I was in Malibu. There's a surfing scene. I went surfing. So I really tried to bottle all of that in the book. And foundationally, though, besides it being a fun adventure with a lot of spicy romance and some soul searching that happens, this is fundamentally a book about healing. And I want readers to know that this is what this story is about at the base of it. And that's the sort of not medicine, but that's the sort of good stuff, the vitamins in the pages of rom-com adventure. So there's some twists that we may talk about. I'll kind of leave it to, we can unpack it some more, but that's the big picture of what this book is about. It's a holiday home swap rom-com with a dose of self-reflection and fundamentally about healing.
I love that. And I also love the fact that you gave us Chicago and not New York, because I think the easier thing would have been New York, except for the expense of New York. So, and I'm particularly fond of Chicago. So you give us a lot of Chicago in the taste, the smell, the excitement of Chicago. Chicago is a lot like New York in the fact that you can do something almost 24 hours a day in Chicago. And that's, I think, when you take a character from Chicago and then you plant them in Malibu, because you and I both live here in LA County, Malibu is very laid back. It's not cheap
Right.
by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very laid back in the fact that it's an old surfing community, and years ago there were a lot of hippies there, so it has this kind of
Mm.
communal vibe to it. But in your book,
Mhm.
throw us a little bit of a twist that we see that while there may be some community, it might not be. We can tell people who we are, but when they see
Mm.
who we are, it may be a very different experience. And that was a twist that you brought up in this book. You gave us a character who, I think before we were recording, we were talking about that maybe down deep inside, Joan is a good person, or at least in her mind,
Mm.
but she's got some things she needs to deal with in her own healing that she has not dealt with. And for most rom-coms, as this reader, I usually find them to be very straightforward. You gave us a twist early on in a rom-com that really had me very, very excited to see where it would go. How important was that twist to you?
I thought it was fundamentally important, to, especially as it pertained to the characters I wrote. So I am writing a Black female character, and I think in a lot of rom-coms and a lot of books that we don't really get fully fleshed out humans with truth of their experience. We get sort of fantasy projections that are not fully dimensional to reality. And when I started writing fiction, I was a nonfiction reader. And
Okay.
so I love nonfiction, for its sort of didactic presentation. And so when I wrote, and it was hard for me to justify a lot of times reading fiction that I wanted to read because I was so busy with work. This is not my first year. And so when I started writing fiction, just what I like to do is take the rules of reality, like when my world building, I try to understand reality. That's a lot of the research work and the internal work and the work that I do in my art, is to really try to take a hard look at what reality is and not create a fantasy picture, but give you a fantasy experience or something that pushes the boundaries of what most people would do and or see within a real world that you can kind of trust, that looks like and feels like the real world. So if you see a romance in one of my books, it's a romance that is not just a fan. It could happen. It's a challenging experience, but it could happen, there. And so there's something, that you can learn. I feel like, hopefully, that I did enough work that you can learn from these books. So when I take a Black female character and I put her in a place that is, let's say, okay, so Malibu is about 10,500 people, and it's, maybe 400 of them are Black, maybe. So
Maybe.
she's an outsider, like, and visibly and otherwise she's from Chicago. Like, all of this is different. And then I had to look and see what are the customs, like what happens, with outsiders in Malibu. It's not that friendly. It's a close-knit community in a lot of ways, and those decisions about who belongs are being made on a variety of factors. So realistically, this is something that would be confronted by a character that of the nature that I crafted, placed in the situation. And then that creates an opportunity, if I'm, really going to address it, go into it, to explore and learn something. And so Joan was an incredible character to write for me. First of all, she's white, I'm not. So I had to, really have some interesting conversations with a lot of people to build her out in a very human dimensional way. I hope she comes across as fleshed out, where she does things that, we wouldn't agree with necessarily, or some people might, who knows, but I think there's a piece of her that should feel strangely familiar, and does that make you comfortable or uncomfortable? So I think for rom-coms, the idea is to be comfortable and escapist, and but I think you can have both. And so that's what I aim for in everything.
Well, and I do feel like Joan was very well fleshed out because you gave her characteristics of almost like a grandmother or an aunt that you're very comfortable with. She knows she's not done the right thing. So what does she do? She begins to bake. because, you know, a cookie is going to make up for everything, you know. And I
Right.
think it's a natural response to a lot of people. They don't know how to say they goofed up. And that's a big
Hmm.
thing too, because that's something else that you wove into sort of the end of the book, is the fact that a Joan may not be able to say, I made a mistake. They'll just pay
Right.
somebody else to fix the mistake, or get someone else to admit that something went wrong without saying, I'm sorry, I did something bad. And I
Right.
find that was a very, I will say that when I read that, I thought of, I do accounting for a day job. And so I have a lot of different
Hmm.
clients. And I had a client very much like Joan, who would constantly say, oh, well, you know, I voted for President Obama and I did this and I did that. And yet he would treat his workers as if they were second class citizens. And I'm like, you
Hmm.
know, you can't have it both ways. You can't trumpet
Right.
what a great supporter of humanity you are and then treat people like dirt. It doesn't work that
Right.
way. And
Right.
I find
Right.
it's a tough conversation to have as well too, because, you know, if you're that worker that's being dumped on, it's hard to challenge the owner of the company to what they're doing. You know, most people either put up with it or they find another job. There's never any conversation about this is really wrong and it needs to be fixed. And that was something that I loved about this book, that you took these issues and you went head on with them. And you also gave
Hmm.
us two very strong women as protagonists, which is, it's important, because as you said earlier, they do a lot of healing, but
Hmm.
they may not see they need to do healing work until
Hmm.
they're confronted with it. So
Right. Well, I think that, you know, you can, I try to make books that, you know, you could just hand to somebody and who needs to read it.
right.
You know, and they'll have a good time, but they'll, you know, they may not tell you that they had some thinking to do and they thought, but they will think. So I think, you know, this is something that I think we need to address, and you know, addressing something difficult doesn't have to always be difficult. So especially if, you know, my job is to make it not so difficult. You know, that's, as an artist, as an author, as a thinker, as an intellectual, you know, that, as an author, a writer, this is part of my job. My job is to do some of the hard work so that I can just put you in a space where you get to think, you know, and you get to look at something that you may not know how to look at. And you know, I realize with humanity, we are complicated. And I have a very deep love for people. I have a very deep love, even when I'm disappointed. And, you know, and I think that love makes me examine and push for uh, a deeper understanding that maybe isn't just available on the surface. And I think with Joan, she's actually one of my favorite characters to write. And if I met Joan in the street, I would have a drink with her for sure.
Good.
You know, like but she's not in the right, you know, like she's not in the right. I call her a soft villain in a sense, but because there are Jones and those people are in works in progress, and they're in, you know, willing to undertake various degrees of self-exploration. Some are not at all. You have the Ramonas who have to figure out, who are often, they're Jones at the expense of Ramonas, you know, and you have to, if this is what is happening, so it's like you have to figure out what then, you know, and what then is healing, so that story for Ramona is so important because it happens,
Yes,
it
yes,
shouldn't have
yes.
happened, but it happened. So that doesn't take away from her joy, that doesn't take away from the fun of the story. And I think that is what the point of this, you know, the most wonderful time, it's very deep, you know, like when you really think about it, there is this interruption, and there are a lot of interruptions, you know, and but that is the nature of what it feels like oftentimes to be uh not just black, but to be in the minority, to be in a quasi oppressed, or, you know, somebody without full privilege, to operate within society fully comfortably and undisturbed. That's what it feels like. And so that is something, and the question is, okay, what do you do with that? So, and you've got to heal from that. You've got to heal as you go. And I think we don't do that well. So that's, if this book can bring anything into the conversation, into our landscape, into society, as a gift to people, I hope that is part of what this does.
It is certainly what I took away from it, Jayne, I tell you. And one thing, so the audience will understand, you also put us in a safe environment. And when I say that, I mean the book itself, the entire book is a safe environment. It's not a pilgrimage to beat someone over the head or to call someone out. No. It's not. It's basically what we see is a journey of two, I might even say three women if we include Joan. On their journey, and what they experience, because we have lived experiences. Each of us have a different lived experience, but our lived experience has to be talked about and examined, because that's what makes all of us a better race, a better community, a better class of people, is to discuss things that need to be discussed. So now I have a very hard-boiled question for you. This is going to be hard-hitting. Really, In and Out? Really, Jayne? Fat Burger isn't better? Oh no, we're gonna have to argue about this now. Fat Burger beats In and Out every day of the week, Jayne. Come on.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, it's round and out. Okay, so I thought long and hard about this, because I was like, you know what? There's going to be a debate, so I am going to give them round and out. And people can take it where they want to go. But you know what? I grew up coming to California. I'm from Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm from Detroit. Michigan. And my mom and I would come out to California because we have family here. And the first California burger that I had was a fat burger. And we thought it was the best thing in between bread, between two buns. And then, now that I've been living here almost 20 years, I still have, I still have love for fat burger, and I'm not going to say that it's not delicious. And so you reminded me, sometimes a new thing does become, we forget about our old favorites. So
well,
you're right. You're right.
Thank you. I feel vindicated. So a unique thing, though, is because you live here and you've been here enough that there are people who literally get off a plane at LAX and their very first stop is In and Out. I mean,
that's right.
If they don't go straight to In and Out, it's Randy's Donuts. It's one or the other, and they have to do it. And it's like, oh, okie dokie then. So, and I was like, okay, no, I can't go for that. So I do occasionally have In and Out, but I'm like, okay, whatever.
Fat burgers. No, in honor, that's your thing. Well, in honor of this conversation, my next burger adventure I'm going to go back and revisit my old favorite, which was Fat Burger.
Oh, wonderful. And
I will post it on
just for me.
I
know. So I'm like, and it's so funny because each of us have something different. I mean, there are some fast food places that I absolutely hate, and I simply won't go to them. I went to one recently that I probably had not been to in 10 years. And I was instantly reminded why I had not been there for 10 years. So I'm like, okay, I got that,
Yeah.
Oh no,
I'm serious about my burgers too. I love a hamburger. I feel like it's the best invention. There's just nothing better.
Precisely. And there are things I want on it and things I don't want on it. So I'm good with that. So talk a little bit about surfing. So I don't swim personally. I mean, I can paddle from one side of the pool to the other, but I would never go in the ocean just because I don't swim. And so I know surfing figures into this book, and it also figures into your personal life. So I assume you swim, and do you like surfing?
Well, I do now. I had no idea. So when I was writing this, so surfing comes into the storyline, you know, when if you're visiting Malibu, and I had to create this experience for Ramona, and I was like, oh, she should go surfing. Of course, she should go surfing. And then I was like, wait, that's weird. You know, like what? I don't. When I think of a surfer, I'm not picturing a Black girl from the South Side of Chicago. And I'm like, I've lived in LA for 20 years, and I have never envisioned myself going surfing. And then I had to kind of interrogate why, because that's part of the process and the journey. And it was really surprising to me what came up for me with, you know, internally when I started thinking about this and like, why have I not done this? And so the obvious thing to do is to go do it, you know, because for her it would be her first time. So I thought, okay, I could have a experience that I could, you know, interpret on behalf of the character. And I think it's important because when I first wrote the scenes, I wrote it all from research.
Okay.
And so I, you know, it was important to go, and I was petrified. I can swim, but I don't swim in the ocean. I really have probably gone in the ocean maybe 5 times. Very familiar with the idea of the riptide, and you know, just not really into it. Like I like you know, I'm totally happy on the sand, like, you know, dip my toes in. But I thought, okay, for the art, I will go. And so I got in my car. I'll never forget this. I booked the class, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. And I was petrified, you know, but I had a great instructor. I filmed all of this. So there's a video. I have created a book website with like kind of to hold. I did so much research. So I'm like, I need to put it all someplace so people can really understand everything that went in this book. But I filmed everything. So I was like, oh Lord, you know, this might be like my demise. But like at least my parents will know how it happened.
Her end.
I know. But you know, when I got out there, I just learned something about myself, about healing, about the water, and it made me realize that I need to dig deeper about why what is the first time I did this myself. And I learned a lot about the history of the coastline, about access, about belonging, about the water, and it introduced me to a whole community of like Black surfers who kind of that journey mirrored the civil rights journey of this country, like to, you know, integrate the water and the waves. And I got all these incredible stories of courage, and I also discovered a new activity that was just a beautiful thing. I mean, even if you like take a board out there and just float, you know, like there's a lot of ways you can experience surfing and experience being on the water. So it changed something within me, and in a profound way. So that brought that, you know, sometimes art, you know, mirrors life, but sometimes
right. And you get to grow from it as well, because you had an experience that you could then give your character that experience. And that's something, because I love the ocean. I'm not going to swim in it, but I think, you know, for nature, my mom was unique in the fact that she taught me to respect nature. So I can't drink the Pacific Ocean. You know, it's just not going to happen. But the thing is, you have to understand its power, the riptides, the current, where they're going. You also have to, I believe you have to respect the beauty of that board, and the water keeps you above the water and you float, or if you are able to stand up and actually surf, there are things that you will learn about yourself as well as nature. And those are important lessons to have if you get the chance.
Right. Absolutely. I can't say enough about the value of having done that for me as a person, and as an artist, and as an author, and in service to the book. So I rewrote everything having to do with surfing after I did that. And then added more because it needed more context. So it fundamentally changed significant portions of the book, having gone out and done it. And it's something I certainly will do again. I haven't had a chance to go to my second lesson, but I do plan to.
I love that.
As soon as
I
I'm
mean,
done with this draft, this new book,
well,
I finished one and started another, so I'm like now again on deadlines. I'm like, okay, it's okay, it'll be fine.
oh, that's wonderful. So I do also want to mention that Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is it in production or has it been optioned?
It's been optioned, so it's in development. The entire development team came to my book event in LA for the TV team. It's great. It's a great team. They're super excited about the project. They're so supportive. So the studio execs and then producers came.
Oh, that is so
So
wonderful. You know,
it's been beautiful.
and I will say this since it's our hometown now, to get anyone to come out to any event in Los Angeles is sort of like, moving the earth, heaven and hell, because it's, we live in a large city and a lot of people like, oh, I can't go there. I mean, it's only a mile away. Well, that's a little too far to drive. I'm like, okay, whatever.
I know. Well, it's like traffic is like a natural event, like weather, It's traffic in LA is the same as if it's, I don't know, natural disasters in other places.
Right. It's its own character. That's for sure. So again, the book is The Most Wonderful Time. It's by Jayne Allen. Jayne, do you have a website or social media you'd like to share?
I do. So the site that I've created for the book is TMWT, like The Most Wonderful Time book.com, but has the video of me surfing, and I've been gradually I'll be adding to it, just the keeping the experience alive. So book tour recaps and, but my main website is JayneAllen.com, and I spend most of my time on social, on Instagram at Jayne Allen Writes. And so if you're looking for me on social, just look for Jayne Allen Writes, and that will usually be my handle.
Perfect. And I'll enter both websites in the show notes for this episode as well.
Okay,
thank you
great.
so much for joining me, Jayne. This has been so fun.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been fun for me too. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.